Time and time again, Capcom have shown that they are the masters of remaking games. They are keenly aware of the fact that making a good remake is all about keeping the core, the heart of the original, intact, while changing, refining, and modernizing everything around it to deliver an experience that is both familiar and new, both faithful and revolutionary, one that evokes nostalgia while also feeling like an ambitious new approach to a classic journey. The remake of Separate Ways, released recently as DLC for the remake of Resident Evil 4, beautifully exemplifies this philosophy and Capcom's magnificent craftsmanship when it comes to remakes. It continues the wonderful tradition of perfectly reinventing beloved entries in this classic franchise. By applying the tried and tested formula of following its predecessor as close as possible, while taking as many liberties as possible, the remake of the side story featuring Ada Wong manages to completely eclipse the original in every conceivable way, resulting in an experience that is not only vastly superior, but it also further cements the remake of Resident Evil 4 as perhaps the best remake this franchise has seen thus far. Heck, it might even make the entire package a stronger offering overall than the original. In this video, I will tell you just what makes the new Separate Ways such a remarkable and masterful retelling of a once humble, simple, and straightforward side adventure. My dear viewers, this is my review of Separate Ways 2023. The spectacular success of this remake can be boiled down to one very simple fact, which, as I described before, is the formula needed to manufacture the ideal remake. Most of the main story beats from the original are here. Most of the big and important moments that define the narrative are still present with few changes. However, the things that link them to each other are almost entirely different. I'm talking completely new areas, enemies, boss fights, and puzzles, which make this remake feel almost like a totally different game at times, in a very good way. Additionally, several things, most notably the characters, are made so much better than what they were originally. All of this leads to one outcome. We get the story we remember and love, but better, and with enough surprises to make the experience feel refreshing and thrilling despite its familiarity. In other words, we get something that is exactly what a good remake, what a perfect remake should be.
Because in this world, someone always pays. Best not to ask who or why. I understood that. Made my peace with it. Until that one night in Raccoon City changed everything.
Now, admittedly, Ada is not really that different in the remake. She is still mysterious, far from an open book when it comes to what she feels and thinks. She still clearly cares a lot about Leon, certainly more than she lets up, and she still plays mostly by her rules, often disregarding the orders of her employer in favor of what benefits or suits her. Though this is perhaps even more apparent in the remake, since she gets to interact with Wesker face to face, unlike in the original. All these aspects of her personality and character were apparent in the original, and they continue to be so in the remake. However, the expansion to Luis's role, which allows Ada to interact a lot more with him, does reveal a more lighthearted and caring side to her, such as when she humors his various jokes.
Your favorite, I believe?
Excellent timing, Ada. You know how I feel about being tied up.
When she tells him not to give up, motivating him to find a way forward in the process.
Pull yourself together, Luis. Make more. You know how, just do it.
Yes, it is possible.
And when she shows genuine concern for him at various points. All these things humanize her in a way that the OG simply couldn't do, since all her interactions back then were with antagonistic characters like Wesker and Krauser, and with Leon, who Ada rarely shows her softer side to. Luis brings out a more vulnerable side of Ada, one that we don't get to see often or at all. The fact that she is infected with Las Plagas in the remake only reinforces this, since it makes her rely on Luis, and Ada is simply not a character that exposes her weaknesses to others. She is not one to let her guard down in front of others, nor would she ever allow them to help or care for her. Certainly not so closely. But here she has no choice. Having this side to her, which we almost never see, be front and center like this, makes her feel like a more complex, dynamic, rounded, and sympathetic character. One that is easier to connect with and root for. One you can genuinely feel for, which results in a more satisfying and gripping story overall.
This is not a negotiation, Luis, so choose your next words carefully.
Whoa. Listen, there is someone who needs my help. You know me, always the good Samaritan.
Luis is without a doubt the character that was improved the most by this remake. Like I stated earlier, his role was expanded, significantly so in fact, which allows him to do and say a lot more, and to leave a bigger mark on the story and on Ada. Now, the remake of the main game already succeeded in making the vagrant Spaniard go from an okay, slightly forgettable, and not so significant character into an amazing, extremely memorable, and very important character by upping his charm, humor, and screen time, and turning him into a tragic figure hell-bent on redemption and righting his wrongs at any cost. However, the remake of the main game only showed one side of his struggles. The end result, what all his choices and hard work accomplished. The remake of Separate Ways manages to elevate him further by showing us the other side of his quest. The first part, everything he did to get what he wanted. In the main game, we saw that he got the medicine to suppress the plaga and he handed it over to Leon. But we had no idea that to get it, he had to endure a perilous trip back to the castle, bicker with Ada, which made her hold him at gunpoint.
Before. This is not a negotiation, Louis, so choose your next words carefully.
Whoa.
Do his best to convince her to let him help Leon, Ashley, and her.
Let me guess. Leon?
Yes, exactly. Leon and that young woman, they're both infected. They need this medicine. It slows the infection, and I know it works. I used it. On myself. So,
Why does this matter to me?
Because you two are infected.
Fight tooth and nail to get to his lab.
Ahí está.
Mierda! Ada, they're here!
Of course they are.
Traverse a blazing inferno in order to try to salvage the medicine.
We can't let the medicine be destroyed!
Luis! Let it go! Luis!
Despair at his inability to save anyone.
It's all gone! Burnt to nothing.
Why is this so important to you?
There are things I must set right. But that is impossible now. It's all over, and I can't help them anymore.
Receive encouragement from Ada.
Pull yourself together, Luis. Make more. You know how, just do it.
Guess it is possible.
Write up a list of ingredients for Ada to gather, which by the way helps to elevate her, since it shows that she does a lot more in the remake to help Leon, even if she needed the medicine as well, and he got the amber as he promised.
Got everything you need.
Good. And I got exactly what you want.
He made some medicine for Ada. He administered it to her, helping her greatly in the process.
You ready? A tu salud. Just remember, it's not a cure. We still need to find a way to get that thing out of you.
He tried to stay with her to help her deal with Black Robe.
Take the amber and go. Once the parasite is sedated, you can give me back that damn stone.
I can't leave you here. Not like this.
Spare me. I'll be fine. We got another promise to keep.
All right, but you come find me as soon as you're done here.
And he went through what must have been a harrowing journey to reach Leon in time to deliver the medicine. And he did all of this while clearly expressing just how badly he wanted to atone for his sins. How much he wanted to help and save Ashley and Leon in order to redeem himself. And then we have his final conversation with Ada, which just absolutely broke my heart. His death in the remake's main game was sad enough, but hearing him thank Ada for allowing him to do something good again was just too emotional.
The amber, Luis. Where is it?
Thank you for the chance to do good again.
What are you saying?
I'm grateful. Like I said, I'm just your good old Samaritan. How about you help Leon when I'm gone, eh?
It made me feel for him even more. And now, I truly wish, more than ever, that his fate was different. The new separate ways went above and beyond with Luis. It definitely cemented him as an amazing and important character that shall not be forgotten anytime soon. He is now easily one of the best side characters in the series. You truly were a fine knight, Don Quixote.
You were a fine knight, Don Quixote.
Having a bad day?
Wesker, to what do I owe this pleasure?
Stop wasting my time, Ada.
Having Wesker show up to speak with Ada face to face is certainly an awesome change, and one that honestly makes sense. Wesker is the kind of person that would want to personally make sure that everything goes according to his plans. He wouldn't sit back and let others do his bidding while he keeps tabs on things remotely, especially if things go wrong, like when Ada fainted. Making him go from the mastermind behind the scenes to the mastermind behind and on the scenes is just brilliant, and not just because it's more in character for him, but also because it allows him to have a more active role in the story. He gets to show off more character and personality. His villainy is made more apparent, and Resident Evil 5 is set up more clearly, with Wesker being firmly established as the villain in it. Plus, Wesker is just a character that we wanted to see more of, because he is that awesome of an antagonist, and that much of an absolute badass. Additionally, his interactions with Ada are just a lot more interesting, since there is more hostility and disagreement between them. You can just feel the tension whenever they clash verbally. This simply was not the case in the original, since Ada was a lot more obedient back then. Or rather, she pretended to be obedient a lot more. And Wesker was not quite as ruthless. So it felt like they were on the same side, even if they did not see eye to eye on everything. While now they feel like unwitting partners with conflicting interests, which is much more entertaining to watch and more fitting. Additionally, having him be responsible for blowing up the island.
I'm at the site and jacked into the main terminal. You're going to blow up this entire island, including the president's daughter. Won't that make things harder for you?
There's no room for half measures. The weak exist to serve the strong.
And providing evidence that Krauser was actively working on countermeasures against him serve to flesh out his evil and how much of a threat he is even more. Lastly, the final scene of the remake, which is entirely new by the way, caps out Wesker's role as the puppeteer beautifully, revealing that he is unfazed by Ada's betrayal, since he already prepared for it, and so his plan remains on course.
Oh, Ada. What to do with you?
The choppers is still within range, sir. Should we open fire?
No. Her little act of defiance changes nothing.
This scene also includes several details present in the original timeline that were not in the original Separate Ways, such as the fact that Wesker procured Krauser's body to serve as replacement for the sample Ada was supposed to give him. This makes the new Separate Ways a more complete story that can better serve as the interlude between RE4 and RE5. It is now basically Resident Evil 4.5, the perfect bridge between both games, which increases its value overall as part of the overarching narrative. It can almost stand on its own as a separate entry. Not all the characters were improved in Separate Ways. Specifically, Leon, Krauser, and Sadler. Now in the case of Leon and Krauser, this is perfectly fine. Leon has the main game, so no need to expand his role in Separate Ways, especially since this would defeat the purpose of this being a side story not focused on him. Krauser meanwhile no longer works with Ada and for Wesker. A change to the story that I think is very good, and an improvement overall. A change that allowed Krauser to have a bigger, more important role in the main game, which definitely makes up for his new lack of presence in Separate Ways. Sadler, however, is a separate issue. He could and should have done more in the new Separate Ways. Now this is not really a negative for the remake per se, since Sadler did not do much in the original either. If anything, the remake is still an improvement, because we see more of him, and his fight is much better, more creative, he now talks during it, and he looks more menacing. But I think that he could have said more. Specifically, right before he fights Ada, he says nothing. He just transforms, and the fight begins. I was honestly expecting him to have a grand speech prepared, to have something to say to Ada, to question her motives, to berate her, etc. Instead, he says nothing. He just unceremoniously transforms and it's boss fight time, which is just very odd. You would think he would have at least one or two things to say to the one that just filled him full of lead and got in his way. A short banter between him and Ada just before the fight would have helped to flesh out more of Sadler's character, while enhancing his impact on the story. It also would have made him feel more like, the main villain that he is. The main story gets this right, but Separate Ways doesn't. He feels like just another boss. Now again, the original did basically the same thing. Worse in fact, but the remake presented a chance to correct and improve this. And while it did so a little, it could have done so much more. Looking back, it's honestly surprising just how derivative the original Separate Ways was. It basically just reused several areas, puzzles, enemies, and bosses from the main game, sometimes simply rearranging them or using them for different things in order to give the illusion that we were playing something new. Now this was perfectly fine, since Separate Ways was added to later versions of Resident Evil 4 for free. Plus, considering that it is supposed to be a side story that runs parallel to the main story, it makes sense that it borrows everything from it. Additionally, back then, we were more tolerant of things like this. I certainly did not mind the repetition. However, nowadays, in 2023, simply copying and pasting most of the main game with minor alterations is not acceptable, especially if you intend to charge extra for it. But there was nothing stopping Capcom from doing just that. Thankfully though, they chose not to do so. Likely, partly, because it would not fly, but also because they have better standards than that. They know how to deliver quality. Therefore, there was never any doubt that they would offer up something worthwhile. However, I had no idea just how much they were going to push the envelope of Separate Ways in order to deliver something worthy not only of being a $10 expansion, but also of the masterpiece that is the remake of Resident Evil 4. They truly went above and beyond, delivering an experience that honestly feels like an entirely different game. First, you have the bosses. The original Separate Ways only had 2 boss fights, if you exclude El Gigante, who you could avoid. One boss was Krauser, lifted straight out of the main game with no alterations other than the arena. And the other one was Sadler, who was technically new, since in the main game, you only face him after he transforms fully. The remake, on the other hand, has 6 boss fights, 7 if you count the final fight against the Black Robe as 2 fights in one. So the remake features double or more than double the boss fights when compared to the original. Boss fights are a staple of many games, Resident Evil included. They are one of the most thrilling moments of any game. The perfect way to cap out or culminate a specific area or location. And they add much to the character and impact of an experience. Plus, they also make the experience more memorable. Safe to say then that the remake is a significant improvement over the original when it comes to bosses. And not just in terms of quantity. Even the quality of its boss fights is vastly superior. Black Robe is a Verdugo, just like Red Robe, and yet the way they fight is entirely different. What is essentially the same boss provides 3 or 4 distinct encounters, and it even has unique transformations. Not to mention that Black Robe was not even present in the original separate ways, and it only played a supporting role in the main game, unlike its fellow Verdugo. El Gigante is a boss that we have faced countless times before across both versions of RE4, and yet they were able to make even a fight against such a familiar foe feel new and refreshing by adding a small twist. The presence of buildings and the ability to rappel onto them, which allows you to get face to face with the beast. Martinico is a completely new boss made exclusively for the new separate ways. And even the way you deal with it is novel. For RE4, mind you, not for the series, since it is the only boss in Resident Evil 4 that you must run away from, and the only one you kill by using the environment. I do, however, think that Martinico should have been a threat for longer. Expanding the area where he appears and having him stalk you for the majority of it would have been extremely nerve-wracking and scary, leading to a more memorable and significant area and boss. Sadler, another returnee from the OG, also gets updated, more so than El Gigante, since he transforms a little and the way he fights is totally different. Now, bosses are not the only area where the new separate ways upped the ante when it comes to threat level, choosing to include several enemies that were not in the OG, such as the Novistador, the Regenerators, the Iron Maidens,
Dread.
and the armadura means that the remake is both more buried and more dangerous than the OG, which makes for a far more thrilling experience. Now, even with the addition of entirely new bosses, familiar enemies that were not in the OG, and with the refinements made to returning bosses, it was still possible for the remake of Separate Ways to feel uninspired if they just had it take place entirely in reused areas taken from the main game. However, thankfully and wisely, they chose instead to create several new areas unique not just to the remake of Separate Ways, but also to RE4 as a whole. They even brought back several areas from the OG RE4's main game that did not make it into the remake. Sure, doing so is less creative than just making completely new locations. But even familiar locations can be refreshing when seen with a new coat of paint, rearranged, and expanded. Plus, their nostalgic nature certainly adds extra value to them. The net result of these changes in scenery result in an adventure that is, visually and gameplay-wise, a lot more, well, separate. It's a lot more distinct. It does not feel quite as derivative. Instead, it feels more like its own thing, while still feeling like a side story, since plenty of areas are still reused in much the same way that they were in the original.
Leon needs help! Hurry!
I'm on it.
Finally, beyond just making most of the characters better, beyond just giving us new things to fight and refining existing ones, and beyond just having us explore new locations, this remake also deserves praise for several small things that it did that go a long way into making the entire thing feel more unlike its predecessor in a good way. Having Ada's grapple gun serve as more than just a tool to get around makes combat with Ada more fun, while also distinguishing the way she fights further from how Leon fights. Giving her the ability to customize her weapons, which now begin completely unupgraded, provides an incentive to explore, to seek treasure, to make decisions, and to strategize more. Allowing us to see the ganado as they head to the church, while completely ignoring us, letting you hear Ashley cry from within the room she is locked in, providing lore for the special rocket launcher, and updating the voice lines of the enemies that speak to match the fact that they are facing Ada and not Leon, are all small changes that make the experience feel more immersive and real. they make the game's world feel more alive. Also, altering the order of events within the story and changing the circumstances surrounding some of them without affecting the overall picture of the narrative ensures that there is enough nuance to surprise even veterans, which makes even a familiar story feel like a new and different one. And lastly, I just love that they let Ashley and Ada talk for the first time ever. While they barely said anything to each other, just getting to see two great characters that never had a chance to interact with each other before finally do so is simply wonderful.
Almost out of here.
There really is no denying, at least for me, that Separate Ways 2023 is yet another gorgeous jewel on the impeccable and immaculate crown of Resident Evil remakes. By keeping the core of the experience intact, while changing, adding, and refining as much as possible for the better, the new Separate Ways manages to totally eclipse its predecessor, delivering an experience that is vastly superior and that is much more capable of standing on its own as a separate but still connected to the main story adventure. Please be sure to share your own thoughts down in the comments below. Also, please do drop a like if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more
Resident Evil.
Additionally, down in the description, I have affiliate links for GameStop, which is where I buy all my gaming related stuff, affiliate links for Amazon, which is where I buy all my stuff that is not gaming related or groceries, and a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page. These links will all allow you to support me directly if you would like to. I would very much appreciate it. Also, I have a link to my main channel where I cover Pokemon. If this is something that would interest you, then please check said channel out. Thank you so very much for watching, and let's meet again in the next video.